welcome into Pro Football Today. It is time for the post-game show now with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio here on SportsGrid TV. And let's just say, I don't know if things got even more exciting in that second half, but there were more points added to the board there. You've got two quarterbacks. Well, let's just say Stafford was able to hit over his number, 293 through the air, one interception, no passing touchdowns. And while I was high and heavy on that one, that was not the case. 32 for 46. You got Williams on the ground, 62 rushing yards, and then Puka Nacua through the air with 98 receiving yards through 9 receptions. On the other side, HN, 37 on the ground, Waddle 57 through the air, leading the wide receiving group, which I don't know if that says much, but Tua 207 passing yards, 1 TD, 1 interception, and a final of 23-15. Dolphins take the win. Dave can keep his Miami gear on, but Tom Vecchio, what did you think of this matchup?
Really tough game from the Rams side of things, and just from like a team level perspective, the sacks, once they got into plus territory, and the Dolphins side of the field, the sacks, the penalties, they're picking up these 9 and 10 play drives, and then they're not converting once they got to the red zone, and they have to settle for field goals. If you were to tell someone Matt Stafford throws 32 completions for nearly 300 yards, you would say he probably has 2 touchdowns at a minimum, and we are in for a game that we saw a lot of points. That was just not the case tonight. And, they kept mentioning on the broadcast, what do the Rams have to do? What does Sean McVay want to say? It's they have to stop shooting themselves in the foot. But, that is the story of this, that they move the ball. I said on the pregame show, the Dolphins' defense is not as good as their numbers. They're giving up 187 passing yards per game, but we have to look at their strength of schedule, which is absolutely terrible. When we actually look at their DVOA numbers, their defense is one of the worst in the league. And we saw Stafford pass for almost 300 yards, yet they don't score any touchdowns. So from a Rams perspective, the penalties, the sacks, the lack of pressure, the high snaps, whatever you want to call it, just bad. It's just bad when that's what it comes down to. And credit to the Dolphins, they brought that pressure on Stafford. They made him uncomfortable. They did all those things that they needed to do, playing with that desperation for where they are in their season. It was an efficient, it was a controlled game from Tua, all things considered, outside of the 1 interception. Slow game from both teams on the ground. I would say I still have faith that the Rams can make the playoffs, but they need to clean things up.
Yeah, there was definitely a number of mistakes that played into all of it, but you also can't discount 4 sacks from the Dolphins. I think they knew that the expectation wasn't there for their defense to apply that much pressure to them, especially when it came to the trenches there. So a number of things that the Dolphins did end up doing well or better than anticipated, and a number of things that the Rams can bring some correction to. The question is there really that much time? And then the guys were just discussing on an in-game live kind of the strength of schedule leading up to this, and teams that the Rams played probably sitting over under that 500 and really evaluating where the success lies. So it's going to be interesting to see what adjustments are made for the Rams moving forward, and we'll talk a little bit more about their strength of schedule coming up and how just to gauge this. But kind of touching and giving some love to the Dolphin side of the ball, you said that Tua did a little better than expected, hit over 200 as you and I talked about on the halftime show. More importantly, it wasn't a massive performance from anybody, but some success there. For the tight end getting involved as expected, and more importantly, not having to rely too much on Hill and HN kind of playing that double role there, right?
Yeah, it was like a well-balanced effort. Okay, Hill's not 100% healthy because he's dealing with this wrist thing. Okay, who else is going to step up? It's going to be a little bit of Jonnu Smith. It's going to be Malik Washington, their rookie, who's did just a little bit more. It's not just going to be one player doing everything. It has to be everyone, contributing here and there, and that's what we saw from the Dolphins. It was a good game plan. Like you said, they brought the sacks, the pressure on Stafford. So good stuff overall from the Dolphins, coming away with this win on the road.
Yeah, totally. And 7 sacks combined between both of these quarterbacks. But a lot to get into here on Pro Football Today. It's the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio. Don't go anywhere. Stick with us here on SportsGrid on the other side of this quick break.
Together, both Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the 2 big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, it's going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid, Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Ferrall Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Are they definitely done with Daniel Jones from this point? And any shot that Dable is off the sidelines, meaning he gets fired before next season?
They have a general manager in Joe Shane. Every big move has to get approval by ownership. So look, the bottom line is they don't know who their future quarterback is past this season. Tommy DeVito's clearly not the answer. They don't have a Drew Lock's not the answer.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
A lot of concern, I would say, for Georgia in Carson Beck. 3 interceptions once again. His third 3-interception game in the last 5 for UGA.
You can argue if they had Alex Orji as their starting quarterback for Georgia, they would be perfect and unbeaten right now just by not turning the football over and running it with your talented backfield.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Back at it with Pro Football Today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio here on SportsGrid TV. In case you missed it, Dolphins do claim the victory 23-15 over the Rams. A number of messy plays on both sides, a fumble frenzy in the second quarter, a number of turnovers, and 7 sacks combined between the two. If you enjoyed this game, congratulations. If your bets weathered the storm of this game, congratulations. Let's talk about it, Tom. What do our cards look like at the end of this result? Because HN didn't get the yardage that I needed. Stafford, not the 2 touchdowns that I needed. He hit the over in attempts. That helped out. And then Robinson finding the end zone, that was not a thing. So how did you withstand?
Well, just a quick recap overall. The Dolphins obviously cover and the under hit. So I guess if you had the under, you might have enjoyed this game. I did talk about Stafford liking both his completions and his attempts, both of those hits. I said this was a Puka Nacua game for the Rams, and I want to say I was halfway there, right? He obviously didn't score, which was the main thing I was talking about, but he had 14 targets, and the next highest player on the Rams was Cooper Kupp at 7. He doubled him up. He led the game, not just the Rams, he led the entire game with 9 catches for 98 yards. I said that I liked him over 67.5 yards. I liked him at 70 plus, 80 plus, 90 plus, and 100 plus. I laddered him all the way up. I spoke about it on the pregame show. He didn't have the touchdown. He didn't hit 100 yards, but he hit all the other yardage props. Stafford hit some of his props. He didn't hit the touchdown props. Kyron Williams did not hit over 19.5 carries, largely because of game script. They were continuing to feed him the ball, and if the Rams were able to score more, as I was anticipating them scoring, hopefully via Puka Nacua, we would have seen Kyron Williams with more carries overall. Again, he had 19 carries in 6 straight games and had been at least 20 plus in 5 of those 6 games. So ultimately, I was halfway there. And I don't want to find some silver lining. Puka Nacua to score was the main play that I was on today. But the yardage were there. He cashed a bunch of those, which is good to see. Stafford cashed some of his. When it comes to the Dolphin side of things, I think Jalen Waddle, if I remember correctly, he went over his yardage prop, which I think was at 42 or 44.5. He went over that on the first drive and then finished the game with just 57 yards. Tyreek Hill hits his unders. Jonnu Smith hit his overs. Cooper Kupp hit his overs. It was a good game from some players, from some props, mainly from the receiving areas. But, man, the yardage was simply not there for Devon Achane or Kyron Williams, at least on the ground.
Yeah, well, it's also tough when you're 3 for 12 on third downs as well, but a lot of those sacks played into all of that. So you got a number of people that are not hitting the panic button when it comes to the Rams, still foreseeing them making that playoff spot. Looking down the stretch here, they're taking on the Patriots, the Eagles, the Saints, the Bills, 49ers, Jets, Cardinals, and then the Seahawks. So do you feel strong about some of these guys solidifying their role on this offense for the Rams to continue or to refine success after this matchup?
It's like a little bit of a mixed bag where the Pats game, I think, would be okay for them to win, a bounce back. It is a away game, so they are traveling west to east. The Eagles is going to be tough. The Saints could be tough. The Saints, obviously, with the coaching change, they are looking a little bit better. Bills, 49ers, tough. Jets, it could be anything. Again, they're traveling west to east. And then you end the season with Cardinals and Seahawks, two division opponents. So depending on how those go, like the teams are trending at the last two, the Rams may have a shot, but they kind of have to, I don't want to say like tread water until then, because obviously the divisional matchups are going to be huge. And not just divisional matchups, they're going to be NFC matchups. So if they pick up, they go 2-0 in NFC, that obviously helps them in tiebreaker scenarios. We're a couple of weeks away from that. But the point being, like, they need to pick up the easy wins, which would be the Pats, maybe the Saints, and probably the Jets. And then if they can get one of the Eagles, Bills, and 49ers, they may have a shot. So, I would take it for the Rams to win the division at plus 380. That probably doesn't happen, but I would have to check their playoff odds as of now.
All right. And then how do we navigate this Dolphins team? Obviously, getting the win tonight doesn't change too much for how their season started off. But down the stretch, they have the Raiders, they have the Patriots, they have the Packers, the Jets, Texans, 49ers, Browns, and then the Jets again to close out the season. So is there any hope or sparkle when it comes to this one?
It's going to be tough for the Dolphins. And it's not like saying they could win against Vegas, New England, New York, Cleveland, and New York. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They could pick up 5 wins realistically. They won tonight, so 3. They'd be staying at like 8 wins, maybe 9 wins. I don't think that's good enough, especially in the AFC, to make it. Like, you would need other teams to drop off. So even if they start to gain some momentum, and realistically, they could win Vegas and New England and all of a sudden be on a 3-game winning streak. I just don't know if that's going to be good enough because they're already so far behind the 8 ball that they're going to need other teams to really slip in order to make up ground, which I just don't see happening in the AFC.
Yeah, honestly, I have to totally agree with you on that one. Final thoughts on this 23-15 victory for the Dolphins before we start looking ahead here, or maybe any angles for either of these teams before we close out.
My final thoughts are I'm going to be on Puka Nacua to score a touchdown next week. That's what it comes down to. 14 targets, led the team, and Cooper Kupp was at 7. He doubled him up. Like, they wanted to get him the ball early and often. Just the inefficiency from the offense overall, the lack of third down conversions, the penalties, the sacks, all of those things played a part in pushing them out of the red zone when they legitimately had chances to score touchdowns. They just didn't get it done. So I'll be on Puka Nacua next week for a touchdown.
All right. Well, there's usually a lot of weight behind that decision, especially when you make your case for it, Tom. So I look forward to the breakdown of that. But also, if you guys haven't heard, Tom's going to be in studio with us coming up this Thursday while we have the Commanders taking on the Eagles. An game that should be quite exciting. But for the most part, are you leaning in one direction or the other? Do the Commanders take this one or do the Eagles take this one?
I think the Eagles may win. I wouldn't mind taking the points with the Commanders if it's still sitting at +3 right now. Like, I think the Commanders are going to certainly come out with some fire. Divisional matchup, like, these are getting to important points of the season. Also coming off I don't want to say tough loss, but it was a hard-fought game against the Steelers. So
yeah.
I'll probably be on the Commanders with the points, and I do think we will see some scoring. There's a lot of talent on both sides.
Definitely. I think this one kind of matches the hype or the anticipation of that. So, yes, I am seeing a 3 on the spread, 49.5 when it comes to the total. That'll be the Thursday night matchup. You'll see Tom with the in-game live crew. You'll still see the pregame party between Dave, Adam, and myself. And then we'll have postgame live and in person with Tom and myself. So make sure you're following SportsGrid over at SportsGrid. Stay up to date on all the coverage. Keep your NFL coverage with us right here on Pro Football Today, the postgame show. It's time to look ahead to not only Thursday, but the Sunday slate. Check up for any other in-division matchups. We're getting into the playoff conversation, so we got to see how this picture is going to start to mold before it concretes. So stick with us here on the other side of the break on Pro Football Today, post-game show on SportsGrid TV.
Together, both Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the 2 big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, it's going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid, Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Ferrall coast to coast, only on SportsGrid.
Are they definitely done with Daniel Jones from this point? And any shot that Dable is off the sidelines, meaning he gets fired before next season?
They have a general manager in Joe Shane. Every big move has to get approval by ownership. So, look, the bottom line is they don't know who their future quarterback is past this season. Tommy DeVito's clearly not the answer. They don't have it. Drew Lock's not the answer.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
A lot of concern, I would say, for Georgia in Carson Beck. 3 interceptions once again. His third 3-interception game in the last 5 for UGA.
You can argue if they had Alex Orji as their starting quarterback for Georgia, they would be perfect and unbeaten right now just by not turning the football over and running it with your talented backfield.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Back at it with Pro Football Today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio here on SportsGrid TV. In case you missed it, Dolphins come out on top 23-15, but we are moving along. We got a Thursday night football showdown that should be very exciting. Hopefully it lives up to all of the hype. We've got the Commanders taking on the Eagles. Spread sitting at 3 currently, total sitting at 49.5, and Tom and I started to discuss this one before we went to the break. You mentioned that there should be some props up, Tom, so let us know what's the foundation that you were laying for this game ahead.
Well, 49.5, immediately we're seeing 4 players at plus 100, at plus 105 or shorter to score. Obviously, Saquon minus 185, Hurts minus 115. And then Eckler and Brian Robinson are tied for the Commanders at plus 105, obviously, because we haven't seen Brian Robinson play. Eckler has been playing that starting role. These are some pretty short odds for touchdowns, and A.J. Brown at plus 135, McLaurin at plus 160. This is a pretty good indication that we're going to see some scoring, as the 49.5 over-under would indicate. So I certainly like that. When it comes to receiving, just at first glance, obviously I'll have to dive into this a bit more. Saquon Barkley coming out of the backfield at only 13.5, I think is a pretty solid spot. His combined is 110.5, which is, that's where Saquon should be. But, 13.5, if we're expecting close to 50 points in this game, I think that's my favorite spot to go. A.J. Brown at 81.5, I think that's just a touch too high for me. Maybe Dallas Goedert, like Saquon. I think we'll see some of these lower props certainly come through.
I actually think that'd be a good point. The Commanders have presented more of an issue than given any credibility for. So loving the spread on this one, honestly, considering the compete. And plus, injury-wise, are there any guys coming back to the lineup for the Eagles, or are they going to be running with the same roster over the past week? Do you know?
They had Dallas Goedert back last week, and he caught a touchdown against the Cowboys. So he's back in. They're fully healthy and ready to go. This is where we would see someone like Grant Calcaterra, who had been starting. This is where he, falls back into a clear, non-factor essentially in the passing game, because A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith are healthy. From the Commander side of things, their starting running back, Brian Robinson, hasn't played over the last 2 games. We did see Austin Eckler pick up 2 touchdowns in their game against the Steelers over the weekend. If we see Robinson back, it's probably going to be a diminished role for Eckler as well, but Eckler would be the primary guy if Robinson continues to be out. So things are, I would say, mostly solidified for the Eagles, and just a little bit of flux when it comes to the Commanders right now.
Okay, so a number of things to keep an eye on as we get closer to Thursday. Jumping ahead a little bit, because I know the emotions are riding high for New York fans. How do we start to gauge the Colts taking on the Jets? 3.5 on the spread, 43.5 on this total coming up Sunday at 1 o'clock.
Oh, I mean, this game's got to be about the under, right? It's got to be about the under. 43.5, the Jets, they scored a bunch, especially in the second half versus the Texans. They couldn't score against the Cardinals, a team that I said to you last week. I said, was it yesterday? I don't know. Last night, I said it on the pregame show. Like, I don't think the Cardinals are a good team. They're not beating impressive teams. Yeah, they piled on a bunch of points against the Jets yesterday, but if the market is viewing the Jets and everyone agrees the Jets are a bad team, and they piled on a bunch of points against the Bears, and they piled on a bunch of points against this team or that team, it's like, congrats. Like, they do have a winning record, but at certain points, like, you have to show me an impressive win. Now, you could say they have an impressive win with this comeback against the 49ers, but it's a 49ers team at that point in the season that were severely hampered due to injuries. So the point being, like, I don't want to lay 3.5 points with the Jets. Like, I was on the Jets yesterday, and they just couldn't get it done against the Cardinals. And I think the Colts and the under are the play. Now, we did get a note that Joe Flacco will remain the starting quarterback per head coach Shane Steichen for the Colts. But ultimately, I don't have a lot of confidence in Flacco going out there. He's constantly throwing picks, as we saw against the Bills. So this game is all about the unders, and it's probably all about turnovers as well.
Yeah, definitely something that I was going to note as well, because we saw a lot of frustration and some insufficiency from Flacco in that competition versus the Bills. Not to mention is that when the pressure comes in, which the Jets can do to an extent, how consistent, we don't know. For 4 quarters, we don't know, but they can do enough to make that kind of a miserable game for the Colts. But I do like the underplay on this one. You guys know I usually like to go over on almost everything. Not for the flair of things, but more importantly, just because it tends to be the theme that runs a bit hotter these days. So, yeah, 3 on the spread, or 3.5 on the spread, 43.5 on that total. We're going to touch on some other of the top Sunday football games coming up here. Don't go anywhere. Stick with us on Pro Football Today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio. Follow SportsGrid over at SportsGrid. Nice and simple over on X. Make sure you're following all the hosts as well, but don't go anywhere. We're going to get into a lot more football in that Sunday slate coming up here on the other side of this quick break on SportsGrid TV.
Together, both Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the 2 big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, it's going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Are they definitely done with Daniel Jones from this point? And any shot that Dable is off the sidelines, meaning he gets fired before next season?
They have a general manager in Joe Shane. Every big move has to get approval by ownership. So, look, the bottom line is they don't know who their future quarterback is past this season. Tommy DeVito's clearly not the answer. They don't have a Drew Lock's not the answer.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
A lot of concern, I would say, for Georgia in Carson Beck. 3 interceptions once again. His third 3-interception game in the last 5 for UGA.
You can argue if they had Alex Orji as their starting quarterback for Georgia, they would be perfect and unbeaten right now just by not turning the football over and running it with your talented backfield.
The early line, only on SportsGrid.
Back at it with Pro Football Today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio. Now running through the Sunday slate after the Thursday night showdown between the Dolphins and the Rams. 23-15 was a success for the Dolphins. Now, I mentioned interesting games. I probably haven't asked your opinion on the interesting games quite yet. We talked about the Jets and the Colts. We talked about the Thursday night football matchup, which I do actually think will be a good one. But let's jump ahead a little bit here. Baltimore Ravens versus the Steelers, 3.5 spread, 47.5 on the current total. Big battle and win for the Steelers this past weekend. Ravens showing that they want to get to the top of the AFC. So what do you think of this one?
The first thing I would note, especially early in the week, if you are someone that bets lines early in the week, you have to shop for the best lines available. And this is something that I think is maybe not talked about enough. The Ravens right now are minus 3.5, like you said. That's on FanDuel. They're sitting at minus 104 on that minus 3.5. But on DraftKings, they're sitting at minus 3, and it is juiced a little bit at minus 118. The point being, there is I don't want to say a massive difference, but we always talk about like key numbers, right? 3, 3.5, 2, 2.5, whatever it might be. A 3 is a push, like if they win this game, which is it's an AFC game, AFC North matchup, I should say, kind of classic, like cold weather, late season game. This game could realistically end at 3 points, and that's a push if you're on the Ravens. And if it's 3.5 and you want to be on the Steelers, that's a win. The Steelers are covering at 3.5. So the point being, we're actually seeing some decent lines or decent differences between lines. And it's not just this game. There are a few differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. So I like the Steelers at plus 3.5 because it's better than 3. So find the best lines available. I also like under 47.5, which I'll certainly be taking in the matchup with the Steelers. Have this defense. The Ravens, we saw it last Thursday, the game that we did. Their defense is terrible. But I don't have an immense amount of trust in the Steelers offense being able to do what Cincinnati did last week. So I like the under. I think the Ravens need to slow the game down because they know they need to focus on their defense.
Yeah, just the Steelers still have some slow moments offensively, so you can't really count on that when you're going to compete with a high octane offense from the Ravens team. Now, this is going to bring me another question, Tom. You don't have to have too much input on it, but I think it just perfectly ties into parts of the pregame show. Dave Sharapan switching out to his Steelers hat, closing out the pregame show. More importantly, saying that he's on the plus 220 for the AFC North winner. Ravens sitting at minus 260, Pittsburgh clipping at the heels plus 220, Bengals 48-1, and then the Cleveland Browns. I mean, we don't really have to go there. So, what do you make of this, and at least Dave's decision, and maybe other people that are thinking, hey, Steelers are doing some good things right now. They're narrowing the competition. What say you?
I think being on the Steelers is probably the right side of things, and at plus 220, that's a pretty good number considering where they are, and especially how their defense has been trending. I will say, if you like the Ravens, you may actually want to root for the Steelers, right? You may actually want to be on the Steelers on Sunday because if the Steelers win, you are going to get a better price on the Ravens to win the division. So if you don't have a ticket on the Ravens and you want to say, I think they will win the division, but I don't like them at minus 260, if they lose, you will get a better number. So this is kind of like inflection point that a lot of people talk about. Like we are at a pivotal game for this division. So if you want to be early on it, you can get the Steelers because if they do win, that you're not going to get plus 220 this time next week if the Steelers win. And then on the flip side, if you like the Ravens, you may actually want them to lose because you think they'll eventually course correct and right the ship, but you'll just get a better number if they actually lose the game.
As the cool kids say, at least sprinkle a little pizza money or beer money on it, whatever your flex may be. Now, diving into the next game that I'm going to have on and curious about, Seahawks taking on the 49ers, 6.5 on the spread, 49.5 on the total. And let's preference by saying this, the Bucs with second and third string guys in the mix really almost had the Niners number, and that's not a biased comment, everybody. It's just facts. What should we expect out of the 49ers versus Seahawks team that we really couldn't pinpoint in one direction or another? They've had some quality games. They've had some garbage games. They've just been all over the spectrum in terms of what they've delivered this season.
It's a good point about the Bucs because what do we have with the Seahawks? We have a team that's coming off the bye. We have a team that's coming off the bye. Maybe they get DK Metcalf back. 6.5 points. If the 49ers are not able to cover, against the team, like you said, with second and third string guys, with the Bucs, the Seahawks with full rest, they should be able to do it, right? They really should be able to cover. I don't know if they win. I think we'd all agree, especially with CMC back for the 49ers, they are the better team, but do they cover? Can they cover a full touchdown? I don't know if the 49ers can do that, so I kind of lean the Seahawks at plus 6.5. And listen, if we do see some steam towards the 49ers and it moves to 7, I think that's the even better spot, obviously.
Yeah, I would totally agree. There's a few things to probably not touch on, but Geno Smith's going to come out and try to find 300 passing yards and get a number of guys involved in that, and at least that's where the point out of attempts and all these other angles come in. So I think it could be a very interesting game, to say the least. Now, we did get some news in terms of health and issues and injuries and more things that just don't look good for the Jacksonville Jaguars, but Jaguars taking on the Detroit Lions, 13.5 on the spread, 47.5 on the total. I don't know if this total is like almost embarrassing for what the expectation should be for the Detroit Lions coming off of an interesting win there.
Yeah, you would like to say that this is a spot for the Lions to kind of settle things down, right? After, again, a crazy game last night that we recapped, 5 interceptions from Goff. Like, this is a chance for them to be back at home, kind of settle things down. Like, they're still in a great spot. As I've said before, I think the Lions are the class of the NFL this year. Get back to the ground game with Montgomery, who had a bit of a slow game. Get back to it with Gibbs. And again, this number's at 13.5 on FanDuel. It's sitting at 13 on DK. It's also 48 points on DK compared to 47.5 on FanDuel. So 13 points, like that's kind of a key spot. That's a touchdown and a field, or I should say, that's a touchdown and 2 field goals, which is like a very realistic outcome. 13.5 points, you need 2 touchdowns for the Lions. So again, find the best lines if you're interested in the Lions. And I like, they should be able to cover this against the Jags, who are completely inept. We saw them do absolutely nothing. And the Vikings defense was great last week, or great yesterday. They didn't do anything on offense. But the Lions should be able to take care of them. Also, the Lions should have Zadarius Smith, who they traded for last week. He was inactive last night. Obviously, they need to fill the Aiden Hutchinson role. He should be active this week. And listen, that defensive line going up against Mac Jones, give me the Lions.
Terrifying. And the expectation is a spotless performance after some of the kooky plays that we saw last night from the Lions, but they were able to bounce back, and a win is a win at the end of the day. I love seeing Smith on the sidelines playing coach. I mean, and the post-game interview. It's just going to be such an energy that he's about to bring to all of this. So look out. The Lions might be coming in a little bit hotter than normal. Is this spread disrespectful? Green Bay Packers taking on the Chicago Bears. I understand the, in division situation. 6.5. 41.5 total. Is there any disrespect on this in pertaining to the Packers and the potential delivery here?
I mean, I think it should be right. I think most people agree that home field advantage for most places is 1.5 or 2. So if this were at Lambeau, we'd be looking at the Packers at about 7.5 or so, maybe. I don't think it would push to 8, but probably 7.5, which is probably where they should be, especially at this time of the year. The Bears offense, the Bears offense is terrible. What were they yesterday? 1 of 14 on third down, or 1 of 13, 0 of 14, whatever it was. I obviously wasn't paying attention to a Bears-Pats game at this point in the season, but the Bears offense, we're getting to the point where it's like it's just completely inept. You would like to think with the talent that they have at wide receiver, with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, the rookie Roman Dunze, and Swift coming out of the backfield, they would have some ability to move the ball and just pick up yards, and that is just not the case. I think the Packers defense is live for a touchdown. I'm going to have some interest in a Packers defensive touchdown, and I haven't dug into like sack props recently, but that really might be the case because the Bears offensive line is terrible.
Oh, and we talked about it so much throughout the first, couple of weeks of this NFL season, but it's just like there's no excuses anymore. Like, even though we gave Caleb Williams some, some margin of error because of what he was playing behind and everything, you said it. I mean, inept is the best way to describe this. There's just nothing going on there. And I feel so bad for Bears fans that had hope and excitement heading into this season. But you know what? It takes time for some things to develop, and hopefully the right moves are finally made, because it just feels like forever and ever since the proper adjustments have helped out the Chicago Bears. But we shall see. More on the Sunday slate coming up here. Pro Football Today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio. Make sure you're following SportsGrid.
together, both Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the two big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, it's going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid, Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Are they definitely done with Daniel Jones from this point? And any shot that Dable is off the sidelines, meaning he gets fired before next season?
They have a general manager in Joe Shane. Every big move has to get approval by ownership. So, look, the bottom line is they don't know who the future quarterback is past this season. Tommy DeVito's clearly not the answer. They don't have Drew Lock's not the answer.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
A lot of concern, I would say, for Georgia in Carson Beck. 3 interceptions. Once again. His third 3-interception game in the last 5 for UGA.
You can argue if they had Alex Orji as their starting quarterback for Georgia, they would be perfect and unbeaten right now just by not turning the football over and running it with your talented backfield.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
You are watching Pro Football Today, the postgame show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio here on SportsGrid, running through the Sunday slate. A number of games that you should have circled on your calendar, and a number of games that, well, you could probably find a fun betting angle or two to assess and make it interesting. Browns taking on the Saints, 1 o'clock on Sunday, 1.5 on the spread, 44.5 on the total. Some things potentially possibly getting cleaned up for the Saints, but what's the expectation with this one?
Oh, it's going to continue to be the Alvin Kamara show for the Saints. We saw it, I want to say, what's the best way to put it? Marquez Valdes-Scantling last week or yesterday, I keep saying last week, yesterday for the Saints with 3 catches for 108 yards, whatever it was, and 2 touchdowns. Like, that's not going to happen on a week in and week out basis. Yes, they're down Rashid Shaheed for the year. Yes, Chris Olave is on IR. They need someone like Mason Tipton to step up. But that's why they have a veteran like Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Is he going to go for 100-plus yards every game? No. Alvin Kamara should be that main player for the Saints on a week in and week out basis. So, again, looking to rushing plus receiving for Kamara would probably be the safest route to go. On the Brown side of things, you would like to see them get the running game going with Nick Chubb. Obviously, I don't fully anticipate that happen just because I truly don't think he's actually at full health. I think David Njoku may be my favorite player on the Browns, probably for the rest of the season. And, as we know, this is a little bit of a revenge game for Jameis Winston going up against one of his former teams. So, let's get into Jameis Winston yardage props once they come out. I'll probably tweet about it throughout the week. When he was going up against the Ravens, I specifically tweeted out Jameis for 300-plus yards, which he did hit. So I'm going to be on Jameis this week, going down swinging as he always does. Whether it's good or bad, the outcome, we know the attempts and the yards can be there for him.
The attempts, the yards, sometimes the touchdowns, as well as the interceptions. The excitement and the entertainment always play.
It's all a part of the Jameis Winston experience. That's just, it is what it is.
It is the Jameis Winston experience.
Right? It's good with the bad. You can't have, it's not just one or the other. It's the good with the bad.
It'd be a great experience if it was an equivalent to the Jimi Hendrix one, but one cannot say that exactly. Moving to the Vikings versus the Titans, 6.5 on the spread, 39.5 on the total. What do we like about this one?
The Vikings looked completely inept on offense against the Jags defense. Now, granted, Sam Darnold had maybe one of his worst games, probably not just of the year, but the recent years. Granted, he didn't start last season for the 49ers, but multiple interceptions, just not good to see. The Titans not a team I'm like super interested in taking points with. I think the Vikings should bounce back. They should get their offense going. Given what we saw from the Chargers offense against the Titans, I do think the Vikings will kind of find their footing and start to put up some points. Justin Jefferson's got to find the end zone at a certain point. Like we've got multiple games in a row without him scoring. I think this time he does it. A 39.5 over-under should indicate what we're expecting. It's probably going to be, I don't know, 27-10 final. Like that's a pretty realistic outcome for this one.
Because of the lack of finding the end zone, do you think we'll probably get some good value on a Justin Jefferson touchdown?
It depends on what the individual person considers value. Like I think last week he was sitting at minus 105 or plus 100. Even if he's at plus 105 or plus 110, like I don't consider that value. Some people will be on it, and they'll even if he's at minus 110, they'll probably look to add that with a Derrick Henry touchdown or someone that has like a super heavy Alvin Kamara touchdown who's juiced at minus 180 because you had minus 180 and this and that, and all of a sudden you got a nice little 2-leg, 3-leg parlay. I wouldn't go to him straight. That's just not something I do. I've talked about time and time before. Stop playing minus odds on touchdowns. You just shouldn't be doing that because touchdowns are variable. Justin Jefferson has been at minus odds for multiple games in a row, and he's just not scoring. It kind of proves my point. So I would look to him on his receptions and his yards well before the touchdowns. And even if he scores a touchdown, I still think it's the right call to not bet it.
Yeah, and I always love when you mention basically the best way to kind of gauge any sort of touchdown props, or at least make it more valuable than the naked eye would foresee originally. Now moving to another game coming up on the Sunday slate. We basically already somewhat touched on this, but Raiders versus Dolphins. This one's coming in at 7.5, and then 44.5 on the total. Can the Dolphins stack on this W from tonight?
You would like to think so. Like this is a game back at home. Hopefully, like if you are backing the Dolphins, you want to see Tyreek Hill more involved. You want to see him get healthier with the wrist. What are we going to be seeing from them? I think we see the under. I think that's the best play for this. The Raiders are like the Bears. We're like approaching the same level on offense. Or they're just completely inept. We're seeing Gardner Minshew start. We're seeing him get pulled. We're seeing it's not Aiden O'Connell because he's hurt now, but we are just seeing their offense not move. I think Brock Bowers is the answer on the Raiders side of things, but I think the ground game for the Dolphins has to be the main focus. I think H.A. coming off a slow game tonight, they need to get things going. It can't all be on Tua's shoulders. He can't be dropping back that many times and taking those kind of hits. So the ground game for the Dolphins has to be the main focus. I think we see the under. I don't know if the Dolphins like they're a bad team. Like they're 3-6. I'm not laying 7.5 points with a team that's 3-6.
Yeah, definitely a stay away in a number of ways. A couple more games to get to on the Sunday slate. Even though we are up against a break, let's go ahead and start breaking this one down. Falcons, Broncos, 1.5 on the spread, 43.5 on the total. Could be interesting.
Credit to the Broncos. They played a great game. Obviously, the blocked field goal for them losing against the Chiefs. I got to say, I think the Broncos are the answer in this game. Like the Falcons, the Falcons should have won that game against a bad Saints team. The Saints obviously riding momentum with the coaching change. The Falcons weren't just able to get it done. Man, Denver's not an easy place to play, going into altitude. So I kind of like the Broncos. And, frankly, I'll have to double check on what the Falcons team total is. But maybe taking a team total under, was it the Falcons total points, 21.5? I think under Falcons team total points and the Broncos to cover -1.5.
Ooh, I actually do like that. I mean, seeing what we saw with the Broncos and the Chiefs, and then seeing some of the downsled of parts of what the Falcons have produced over the past couple of weeks, I don't think it's hurtful to kind of give an extra look over to the Broncos here. Any players that you would kind of consider on the Broncos side?
So the Broncos are good against the pass. They're pretty bad against the run. So Bijan Robinson is probably the answer. And then we've seen the second running back for the Broncos, Audric Estime, get more involved ahead of Javonte Williams. So if Estime has some props out there, I'll certainly be taking a look at those.
All right, a couple more games to dive into here on Pro Football Today. It's the post-game show, and in case you missed it, Dolphins grab a W 23-15 over the Rams, looking to continue their success, matching up with the Raiders next week. But most importantly, stay tuned with us here, Pro Football Today, the post-game show, as we touch on a little bit more on the other side of this quick break.
together, both Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the two big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Are they definitely done with Daniel Jones from this point? And any shot that Dable is off the sidelines, meaning he gets fired before next season?
They have a general manager in Joe Shane. Every big move has to get approval by ownership. So, look, the bottom line is they don't know who their future quarterback is past this season. Tommy DeVito's clearly not the answer. They don't have a Drew Lock's not the answer.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
A lot of concern, I would say, for Georgia in Carson Beck. 3 interceptions once again. His third 3-interception game in the last 5 for UGA.
You can argue if they had Alex Orji as their starting quarterback for Georgia, they would be perfect and unbeaten right now just by not turning the football over and running it with your talented backfield.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
One more rally here at Pro Football Today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio on SportsGrid. Make sure you're following SportsGrid over at SportsGrid. Let's dive into the rest of these games on Sunday before we have the honor of hanging out with you in studio coming up this Thursday. Make sure you're following Tom Vecchio as well, because as these props start to come out, you put your opinion out there on some of these top players that should produce. And look, for the most part, you stay quite hot when you mention revenge game and who is going to be the top player of each game. So it's always fantastic stuff. I can't say that I saved this one for last-ish because I really don't know what to make of it. Chiefs, Bills, 1.5 on the spread, 45.5 on the total, and while the Chiefs just find ways to win, what do we expect from this one?
I expect this game to start off super scripted from both sides. I think the Bills are going to be playing this one like it's an AFC championship game. They want to prove that they can hang with the Chiefs. I would expect people to take points with the Chiefs. Again, there's not many chances throughout the season that you can take points with the Chiefs. That's just, it is what it is. So I expect some people to be taking those points. Again, it's going to start off super scripted, and that probably means we're going to see a lack of scoring early. So I expect the live total to drop. It's at 45.5. Once the game gets going, if it does start off super scripted, that live total drops to 38, 39.5, 38.5, somewhere around. I'm going to start taking a live over. So I have no plays on it right now. I guess I'll take the Chiefs maybe when it comes to like my pick 'em pool, when I'm not actually going to bet on them. I want to bet on live overs. I want to see the game start off slow, and then we'll see the points pick up, as we've seen from the Bills, not just because it's a tough matchup, but as we've seen from the Bills in multiple games this season, they're actually better in the second half of games. They get that scoring going. So live overs in this game.
All right, that's something definitely to gauge. Do you have an idea yet which players you're going to say could take the cake on being the most productive in this game? Is it a Hopkins game again versus the Bills?
I have more interest in the Bills, but it's too soon to tell because Keon Coleman didn't play last week. Neither did Amari Cooper, and their starting tight end Dalton Kincaid got hurt with a knee injury, left the game, came back, then left again. So their offense is completely up in the air right now. Khalil Shakir for the Bills and probably James Cook on the ground, depending on the health of the wide receivers.
All right, some things to keep an eye on as we head back into the weekend. Bengals, Chargers, another 1.5 on the spread, 46.5 on this total coming up. And let's just say the Bengals just need a clean, clear, crystal win. But what do we foresee with this one?
Super fun game. Thankfully, they flexed this out. It was going to be Jets-Colts on Sunday night, and the NFL flexed them out to Bengals-Chargers, actually giving us what really should be a fun game. So 46.5, I think, is a solid number. We can get over. It's not sitting up at 48 or 49.5. I do like the over in this game. The Chargers have been super solid on defense. Like, that has been their calling card. They're just holding teams down to less than 17 points per game. So I do like the Chargers at -1.5. I still think we will see some yards from Burrow as we do week in and week out, just because, A, their defense isn't good and he has to pass the ball. So Chargers, probably over 46.5. I think we are in for a close back and forth game, though.
I like the over as well, just seeing how the Bengals push the envelope versus the Ravens. And again, they just need a clear win. All right, wrapping it up with Texans versus the Cowboys. Doesn't look like the Cowboys will be having Dak Prescott. It looks like a Cooper Rush all day. Maybe they get some help on defense, but regardless, 7.5 on the spread, 42.5 on the total.
Yeah, another team with Houston that needs just a clean, straightforward game, come away with a win. You would like to say that they control it from start to finish, especially after not just what we saw from them last night where they had the lead, they're collapsing in the second half, the turnovers from Stroud. I think this needs to be a ground game from Joe Mixon, and depending if they get Nico Collins back, who was activated off of IR, but he wasn't active for last night, I think they need to get him involved in some capacity. Now, he's an elite receiver. He was averaging over 100 yards per game before the injury. His prop is probably going to be in the 70s or 80s. There may be a point where I actually have interest in his under if it's too high, because they don't want to push him out there too much coming off the injury, right? They need to have a straightforward game. They need to get him involved in some capacity, but ultimately, if they're this far out ahead of 7.5 point favorites, it's going to be a Joe Mixon game from them. So get Nico Collins involved a little bit, and then let's kind of take it easy and make sure he's healthy for the remainder of the season.
Yeah, and I feel like there were some moments where Mixon felt caged in last night. So when you got a guy who wants to break free out of that cage, it can be a very big game, a fun game for him indeed. And plus, I expect C.J. Stroud to build off of some of the positives of his performance yesterday. It's that time of the year where we have to start looking a little bit closer to some Super Bowl odds. But regardless, it means that you want to keep all of your coverage, updates, and all the goods with us here on SportsGrid TV when it comes to the rest of the NFL season and all the other fantastic sports. You know the deal. Pro Football Today has the pregame show as well as in-game live to give you all of the best lines, odds, and betting advice when it comes to Thursday Night Football. So make sure you join us back here, Pro Football Today, for Thursday Night Football. Everybody have a safe and wonderful Monday. And once again, thank you, Vecchio, for your service.